North Carolina mills in the late 19th and early 20th century promised many things, including a steady pay, education, social events, sports teams, and a sense of community. But in truth, children and adults faced dangerous machinery, unhealthy conditions, and poverty in the mills. After the Civil War, many families were centered on farming. They grew their own food, made their own clothes, and ate their own livestock. Soon, however, mills began springing up into nearly every town. Children and adults alike looked at the mills as a way to earn money for themselves. As more and more people moved to the mills, the town's populations grew. Greensboro, North Carolina, had a population of 500 in 1870. But by 1990 had inflated to 10,000 people.
Me, I grew up on a farm, and it was real interesting to me to see what went on in the company, where they'd run what they call pickers, and it would pick the flaws and all out of the material. They also made furniture material, too.
The Civil War had reduced the South's economy dramatically. In an effort to rebuild, the South switched from a previously agricultural-based economy to one centered around manufacturing. Before the Civil War, the South had grown cotton to ship up to the North to have it spun into thread. Soon, however, the Southern plantations would be able to grow cotton and then process it in the newly built Southern mills and factories. In North Carolina alone, 6 mills were built on average per year from 1880 to 1900. The mills also attracted many working families, increasing town and cities' populations. In 1840, North Carolina had 25 textile mills containing nearly 50,000 spindles and around 700 looms, which employed around 1,200 people. All of these numbers had increased dramatically by 1900.
We had what they call a little cart that came through with drinks and different cookies and stuff like that on it. And that's what we would eat, if we needed to. We'd buy RC Cola and a bag of peanuts. Got the RC for a nickel, bag of peanuts for a nickel. And we'd put those peanuts in our RC Cola. They were good like that. I remember all that.
Mills attracted adults and children alike with their promises of a steady paycheck. Families who had previously lived on farms usually suffered from droughts or bad crops and could barely feed themselves, yet alone make a profit. The family soon found out that it wasn't enough for the parents to work. And able to pay for mill housing and the bills from the mill store, it was necessary for the children to work as well. Child labor was not restricted to the southern states. In the North, children as young as 4 worked in mills and factories, producing tobacco, cotton, and many other goods. It was not unusual for a child to fall down an elevator shaft or be mangled by a machine. In the southern states, conditions were even worse, since children were practically slaves and actually replaced many black slaves in the mills. The accident rate for southern mill children under 16 years old who worked among the moving shafts, belts, and gears was twice as high as that of adults. By 1900, 25,000 children under the age of 15 were working in southern factories. Of these children, 90% were located in North and South Carolina, Georgia, and Alabama. Children and adults alike face these safety problems. In the mills, there were open belts and gears everywhere that could catch an apron or a lock of hair, and as the gears turned, they would slowly pull you in, mixing your flesh with the newly spun cotton. There was also a disease known as bisonosis, commonly called brown lung. This was a major problem in textile mills, when all of the dust and lint would rise up into the air.
State legislature in 1903, they passed a law that was supposed to prohibit kids under 12 from working in factories.
The older people tried to encourage us young people and tell us how to do and how to respect the older people, you know.
Schools back then are not like they are today. One middle school in Cherryville, North Carolina, had one schoolhouse for 364 students and 9 teachers.
The mills promised better pay than the families could get on the farm. And that's why the farming families decided to make the move. They're not dumb, and if they didn't get what they wanted, they would have gone back and sought their opportunities elsewhere. So, depending on the year, some years were better than others. If the markets were good, it was possible to make a go of it in the factories.
He ran the machine where they brought in wool, and they had to go through that wool and process it.
Oh, yeah.
And then they had to run it through the what they call a washer, and then through the dryer to dry it. And by that's one of the things that they made the blankets out of.
Lewis Hine was a photographer who would sneak or lie his way into mills and factories to photograph and document underage children working. Several committees, including the National Child Labor Committee, which was formed by Edgar Garner Murphy and Alexander J. McElway, hired Hines. In 1909, Hines had taken more than 800 photos of textile workers in the South and in New England. Hine once said, "There is work that profits children, and there is work that brings profit only to employers. The object of employing children is not to train them, but to get high profits from their work." The first movement against child labor began with protesters such as the Knights of Labor, Lewis Hine, and Mary Harris Jones. Mary Harris Jones was a strong supporter of ending child labor. She led several strikes, such as one in 1903, which was a 20-day march with mill children and adult workers. Serious reform laws started passing a few years later, such as the Fair Labor Standards Act, signed by Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1938. The law, drafted by Senator Hugo Black of Alabama and signed in June 1938, was designed to put a ceiling over hours and a floor under wages. It stated that the minimum wage an employer could pay his workers was 40 cents an hour, and assured a person working overtime is paid 1.5 times their usual hourly rate. The Fair Labor Standards Act also declared that no child under the age of 15 could work in a mill. It was the stepping stone, the more acts, that would soon abolish child labor in the South. There are no longer any children working in Southern mills and factories, thanks to men and women such as Lewis Hine and Mary Harris Jones, who decided to put an end to what they, and many others, believed was wrong.
As we go in and do the jobs that babies used to run, come out of bed, little sleepy heads, and get your bite to eat. The factory whistle's calling you, there's no more time to sleep.